Agenda 21, Chapter 24. Global Action for Women Towards Sustainable and Equitable Development. Program Area. Basis for Action. 24.1. The international community has endorsed several plans of action and conventions for the full, equal, and beneficial integration of women in all development activities, in particular the Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategies for the Advancement of Women, which emphasize women's participation in national and international ecosystem management and control of environment degradation. Several conventions, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, General Assembly Resolution 34-180, Annex, and conventions of ILO and UNESCO have also been adopted to end gender-based discrimination and ensure women access to land and other resources, education, and safe and equal employment. Also relevant are the 1990 World Declaration on the Survival, Protection, and Development of Children and the Plan of Action for Implementing the Declaration, A45-625, Annex. Effective implementation of these programs will depend on the active involvement of women in economic and political decision-making and will be critical to the successful implementation of Agenda 21. Objectives. 24.2. The following objectives are proposed for national governments. A. To implement the Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategies for the Advancement of Women, particularly with regard to women's participation in national ecosystem management and control of environment degradation. B. To increase the proportion of women decision-makers, planners, technical advisors, managers and extension workers in environment and development fields. C. To consider developing and issuing by the year 2000 a strategy of changes necessary to eliminate constitutional, legal, administrative, cultural, behavioral, social and economic obstacles to women's full participation in sustainable development and in public life. D. To establish by the year 1995 mechanisms at the national, regional and international levels to assess the implementation and impact of development and environment policies and programs on women and to ensure their contributions and benefits. E. To assess, review, revise and implement, where appropriate, curricula and other educational material, with a view to promoting the dissemination to both men and women of gender-relevant knowledge and valuation of women's roles through formal and non-formal education, as well as through training institutions, in collaboration with non-governmental organizations. F. To formulate and implement clear governmental policies and national guidelines, strategies and plans for the achievement of equality in all aspects of society, including the promotion of women's literacy, education, training, nutrition, and health and their participation in key decision-making positions and in management of the environment, particularly as it pertains to their access to resources, by facilitating better access to all forms of credit, particularly in the informal sector, taking measures towards ensuring women's access to property rights as well as agricultural inputs and implements. G. To implement, as a matter of urgency, in accordance with country-specific conditions, measures to ensure that women and men have the same right to decide freely and responsibly the number and spacing of their children and have access to information, education, and means, as appropriate, to enable them to exercise this right in keeping with their freedom, dignity, and personally held values. H. To consider adopting, strengthening, and enforcing legislation prohibiting violence against women and to take all necessary administrative, social, and educational measures to eliminate violence against women in all its forms. Activities. 24.3. Governments should take active steps to implement the following. A. Measures to review policies and establish plans to increase the proportion of women involved as decision-makers, planners, managers, scientists, and technical advisors in the design, development, and implementation of policies and programs for sustainable development. B. Measures to strengthen and empower Women's Bureau, women's non-governmental organizations and women's groups in enhancing capacity building for sustainable Development. C. Measures to eliminate illiteracy among females and to expand the enrollment of women and girls in educational institutions, to promote the goal of universal access to primary and secondary education for girl children and for women, and to increase educational and training opportunities for women and girls in sciences and technology, particularly at the post-secondary level. D. Programs to promote the reduction of the heavy workload of women and girl children at home and outside through the establishment of more and affordable nurseries and kindergartens by governments, local authorities, employers, and other relevant organizations, and the sharing of household tasks by men and women on an equal basis, and to promote the provision of environmentally sound technologies which have been designed, developed, and improved in consultation with women, accessible and clean water, an efficient fuel supply, and adequate sanitation facilities. E. Programs to establish and strengthen preventive and curative health facilities, which include women-centered, women-managed, safe and effective reproductive health care and affordable, accessible, responsible planning of family size and services, as appropriate, in keeping with freedom, dignity, and personally held values. Programs should focus on providing comprehensive health care, including prenatal care, education, and information on health and responsible parenthood, and should provide the opportunity for all women to fully breastfeed at least during the first 4 months postpartum. Programs should fully support women's productive and reproductive roles and well-being, and should pay special attention to the need to provide equal and improved health care for all children, and to reduce the risk of maternal and child mortality and sickness. F. Programs to support and strengthen equal employment opportunities and equitable remuneration for women in the formal and informal sectors, with adequate economic, political, and social support systems and services, including child care, particularly daycare facilities and parental leave, and equal access to credit, land, and other natural resources. G. Programs to establish rural banking systems with a view to facilitating and increasing rural women's access to credit and to agricultural inputs and implements. H. Programs to develop consumer awareness and the active participation of women, emphasizing their crucial role in achieving changes necessary to reduce or eliminate unsustainable patterns of consumption and production, particularly in industrialized countries, in order to encourage investment in environmentally sound productive activities and induce environmentally and socially friendly industrial development. I. Programs to eliminate persistent negative images, stereotypes, attitudes, and prejudices against women through changes in socialization patterns, the media, advertising, and formal and non-formal education. J. Measures to review progress made in these areas, including the preparation of a review and appraisal report, which includes recommendations to be submitted to the 1995 World Conference on Women. 24.4. Governments are urged to ratify all relevant conventions pertaining to women if they have not already done so. Those that have ratified conventions should enforce and establish legal, constitutional, and administrative procedures to transform agreed rights into domestic legislation and should adopt measures to implement them in order to strengthen the legal capacity of women for full and equal participation in issues and decisions on sustainable development. 24.5. States parties to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women should review and suggest amendments to it by the year 2000, with a view to strengthening those elements of the Convention related to environment and development, giving special attention to the issue of access and entitlements to natural resources, technology, creative banking facilities, and low-cost housing, and the control of pollution and toxicity in the home and workplace. States parties should also clarify the extent of the Convention's scope with respect to the issues of environment and development, and request the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women to develop guidelines regarding the nature of reporting such issues, required under particular articles of the Convention. A. Areas requiring urgent action. 24.6. Countries should take urgent measures to avert the ongoing rapid environmental and economic degradation in developing countries that generally affects the lives of women and children in rural areas suffering drought, desertification and deforestation, armed hostilities, natural disasters, toxic waste and the aftermath of the use of unsuitable agrochemical products. 24.7. In order to reach these goals, women should be fully involved in decision-making and in the implementation of sustainable development activities. B. Research, data collection, and dissemination of information. 24.8. Countries should develop gender-sensitive databases, information systems, and participatory action-oriented research and policy analyses with the collaboration of academic institutions and local women researchers on the following. A. Knowledge and experience on the part of women of the management and conservation of natural resources for incorporation in the databases and information systems for sustainable development. B. The impact of structural adjustment programs on women. In research done on structural adjustment programs, special attention should be given to the differential impact of those programs on women, especially in terms of cutbacks in social services, education, and health, and in the removal of subsidies on food and fuel. C. The impact on women of environmental degradation, particularly drought, desertification, toxic chemicals, and armed hostilities. D. Analysis of the structural linkages between gender relations, environment, and development. E. The integration of the value of unpaid work, including work that is currently designated domestic, in resource accounting mechanisms in order better to represent the true value of the contribution of women to the economy, using revised guidelines for the United Nations System of National Accounts, to be issued in 1993. F. Measures to develop and include environmental, social and gender impact analyses as an essential step in the development and monitoring of programs and policies. G. Programs to create rural and urban training, research and resource centers in developing and developed countries that will serve to disseminate environmentally sound technologies to women. C. International and regional cooperation and coordination. 24.9. The Secretary-General of the United Nations should review the adequacy of all United Nations institutions, including those with a special focus on the role of women, in meeting development and environment objectives, and make recommendations for strengthening their capacities. Institutions that require special attention in this area include the Division for the Advancement of Women, Center for Social Development and Humanitarian Affairs, United Nations Office at Vienna, the United Nations Development Fund for Women, UNIFEM, the International Research and Training Institute for the Advancement of Women, in Straw, and the Women's Programs of Regional Commissions. The review should consider how the environment and development programs of each body of the United Nations system could be strengthened to implement Agenda 21 and how to incorporate the role of women in programs and decisions related to sustainable development. 24.10. Each body of the United Nations system should review the number of women in senior policy level and decision-making posts and, where appropriate, adopt programs to increase that number. In accordance with Economic and Social Council Resolution 1991-17 on the improvement of the status of women in the Secretariat. 24.11. UNIFEM should establish regular consultations with donors in collaboration with UNICEF, with a view to promoting operational programs and projects on sustainable development that will strengthen the participation of women, especially low-income women, in sustainable development and in decision-making. UNDP should establish a women's focal point on development and environment in each of its resident representative offices to provide information and promote exchange of experience and information in these fields. Bodies of the United Nations system, governments and non-governmental organizations involved in the follow-up to the conference and the implementation of Agenda 21 should ensure that gender considerations are fully integrated into all the policies, programs, and activities. Means of implementation. Financing and cost evaluation. 24.12. The Conference Secretariat has estimated the average total annual cost, 1993 to 2000, of implementing the activities of this chapter to be about $40 million from the international community, on grant or concessional terms. These are indicative and order of magnitude estimates only and have not been reviewed by governments. Actual costs and financial terms, including any that are non-concessional, will depend upon, inter alia, the specific strategies and programs governments decide upon for implementation. Notes. 1 Report of the World Conference to review and appraise the achievements of the United Nations. Decade for Women, Equality, Development and Peace, Nairobi, 15 to 26 July 1985, United Nations. Publication. Sales No. E.85.4.10, Chapter I, Sect. A.